Hello students, today I will be talking about leavening agents, and let us see what are these leavening agents and what is the purpose. Leavening is the process or the production or incorporation of gases in a baked product. So, when you eat your cake or pastry, it becomes big and fluffy and very spongy. That sponginess is due to the leavening agents which are used during the baking. Now, gases increase the volume and give shape and texture to the product. The gases must be retained in the product until the structure is set. This is done by the coagulation of gluten and egg proteins and the gelatinization of starches, which enables it to retain the shape. Any process by which the dough or batter is filled with holes and are retained upon baking is a leavening process. Any material which brings this process is called a leavening agent. Leavening agents are needed for the following reasons. Baked products so made are light and therefore easily chewed, because baked products made with leavening have an open or more porous grain than unleavened products. The digestive juices come in contact with the food more readily and the digestion is greatly facilitated. Baked products made with leavening agents are more palatable and appetizing than those which are made without leavening. Now, imagine a cake in which baking powder was not used, or by mistake when you are making a cake you forget to add the baking powder. Immediately you will be able to understand the difference between the one with the baking powder, the one without, because the one without the baking powder does not rise and does not become soft and porous and light, but it becomes thick and a very dense product, and it does not even taste good. Now, let us look at the different types of leavening agents and their uses. Types of leavening agents include, depending on what is the method of leavening which is used. We have chemical, mechanical, biological or natural, and what is the method of incorporating the air, creaming method or whether it is whisking method, whether we are using to bring about the leavening yeast or whether we are using steam or vapor pressure. Now, in this we also use baking powder, baking soda, ammonium bicarbonate. The leavening of baked products may be brought about by 4 general methods. As I already said, mechanical, chemical, biological or natural, and vapor pressure. Mechanical method. It is incorporation of air into a batter by the creaming and beating methods. So, when we start making a cake, first thing that we do is to soften the butter, add the powdered sugar and beat the butter and sugar together, which is called as creaming. So, when we are doing the creaming method, we are incorporating the air and the batter becomes light. This air expands during baking and leaves the products. It must be done up to the required time only. If it is overdone, it may spoil the texture and the volume of the product. By creaming action, when fat is creamed with sugar or flour, this mixture is filled with minute air cells which expand under the action of heat and in the process give volume to the product. Now, by beating of the eggs. So, you must be reading in the cake preparation process, beat the eggs. First cream butter and sugar and then beat the eggs. What do we mean by beating of the eggs? When eggs are beaten, they become fluffy and foamy because air is incorporated and the volume of the content becomes more. That is, it increases in amount. Chemical method. By release of carbon dioxide. Now, you want to make any kind of food product which is light. So, what do? You add baking powder, which upon cooking or application of heat releases carbon dioxides. Chemicals which are mixed in the recipes to increase the volume of the product are called chemical agents like baking soda, baking powder and ammonium carbonate, when they are moistened with water and heated, release carbon dioxide gas which expands during baking and imparts volume to the product. Baking soda or sodium bicarbonate. When it is heated, it releases sodium carbonate, water and carbon dioxide. This sodium carbonate gives an unpleasant smell to the product and color of the cake will be brown. If excess of soda is used, it will result in a very not a tasty or what we call unpalatable product with yellow spots on the surface. Baking soda is also known as chemically sodium bicarbonate and has the formula of what we call NaHCO3. It liberates carbon dioxide, a leavening gas. When heated, it also liberates the same gas when it is mixed with an acid, either hot or cold. When used alone, it reacts with shortening, that is the fat and sugar, and a residual flavor is felt. Besides causing an unpleasant taste, brown color and alkaline odor are felt. If excess of soda is used, it will result in an unpalatable, means untasty product with yellow spots on the surface. Therefore, it is not used alone and it is used along with some other leavening agent. A suitable quantity of acid is added so that neutral residue is formed. Some of the acid ingredients which are used along with baking soda are sour milk, honey, molasses, invert sugar, lemon juice and buttermilk. Storage. Once opened, store all of these foods, that is especially baking soda, away from moisture. Salt and baking soda can absorb odors from the storage area even through the packaging. They will still remain acceptable for use for several years. Baking powder. It is a combination of sodium bicarbonate and an acid salt. When moistened and heated, the baking powder releases carbon dioxide gas which leavens the product, giving it volume and making it light and easy to digest. Baking powder should release its gas in the batter to saturate it with carbon dioxide gas uniformly during baking to hold the raised batter until set. This tends to give a uniform crumb and prevents the shrinkage of cakes and stops the cakes from falling or sinking, as we call technically. Baking powders contain an inert filler. Mostly common corn starch is added as a buffer between soda and the acid, and it prevents the reaction when exposed to air by absorbing the moisture. That is, the corn starch absorbs the moisture, not the baking soda. The starch also helps the powder to release standard amount of carbon dioxide slowly. Baking powder is of 3 different kinds. The fast acting, this type of powder usually consists of calcium acid phosphate. These are the powders which release a good share of their leavening gas in a relatively short time after mixing and continue to release the gas rather rapidly during the depositing operation and while the batter is on the bench. Slow acting. The slow acting ingredient will be either sodium pyrophosphate or sodium aluminium sulphate. These are the powders which do not release the greatest percentage of their leavening gas until the product is heated in the oven. Double acting. It is a combination of the fast and slow acting types of baking powder and is most widely used by the bakers because they don't want slow release nor do they want the fast release. It releases a part of the gas during bench operation, that is while mixing, which increases the fluidity of the cake batter. This facilitates easy weighing operation and transferring to the mold for baking. The remaining carbon dioxide gas is released during baking, which gives volume to the end product. Storage. Let us look at the care that needs to be taken for baking powder storage. Iodized salt and baking powder have an indefinite shelf life when kept free of moisture and contamination. Baking powder has a best if used by date of 18 to 24 months. That is, once you buy the baking powder, you can store it safely under airtight conditions and use it for up to 1.5 to 2 years. Don't expose baking powder to steam, humid air, wet spoons or any other moisture. Store in a tightly lidded container for no more than a year. Biological or natural methods of leavening. Natural agents are those which are available naturally and which can be used in a recipe to impart raising or leavening action. For example, the most commonly used in the baking industry is the yeast. Yeast, let us look at their types, constituents and storage. Now, yeast is a unicellular microorganism. It is biologically named as Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It is also called as baker's yeast. It was discovered by Louis Pasteur in the year 1859. It is a living organism and it is mainly used in bakery industry for the process of fermentation. The yeast reacts with the sugar and gives carbon dioxide and alcohol. Yeast plus sugar is carbon dioxide plus alcohol. Here, carbon dioxide is used to impart volume to the product and alcohol is used to give a peculiar flavor or sour taste to the food items. What are the types and composition? There are two types of yeast, fresh yeast and dry yeast. The average constituents of fresh and dry yeast are given in the table. Constituents of yeast include the fresh yeast has 14% of protein, whereas dry yeast, because it is concentrated and no moisture, it has 46% protein. Carbohydrate is in fresh yeast 10%, in dry yeast it is again higher 36%, and fat amounts are very negligible. Minerals are again high in the dry yeast. Moisture content obviously will be more in the fresh yeast and very less in the dry yeast. Vitamins and enzymes which are needed to activate the yeast are present. The composition constituent varies with the type of yeast and the conditions under which the yeast is grown. Yeast contains a relatively high level and better quality protein. The principal carbohydrate of the yeast is glycogen and secondly hemicelluloses. The mineral content of yeast consists of oxides of phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, calcium, silicon, etc. Vitamin B and C are also present in the yeast, but yeast is used only in small amounts, so it does not become the source of nutrients in a baked goods, but yeast sometimes is advised to be taken mixed with water to increase the B complex vitamin level in a person. Now, enzymes which include are protease, lipase, invertase, maltase and zymase. The important enzymes, as I said, fresh yeast, cream yeast you get in the market, compressed yeast, dry yeast. Now, instant dry yeast, fresh yeast is also known as compressed yeast because it is a moist mixture of yeast, plants and starch. It is inactive at cool temperature. So, it is mostly stored in the refrigerator or the freezer part of the refrigerator. It produces gas rapidly when added to the dough. Bakers prefer fresh yeast because it is cheaper and it is more reliable because it contains active organisms. It should be kept in the refrigerator at a temperature of 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit, that is at an extremely low temperature. It can be stored for 2 to 4 weeks as it contains high moisture content and it should not be stored for longer than the specified time. Cream yeast is not available in Indian markets. This yeast is available in the suspension form and is transported by motors and tube. It can be stored only for 7 to 10 days. Dry yeast is also known as active dry yeast. It is a mixture of yeast with corn flour or corn meal pressed into cakes and dried. It is available also in the granular or powder form. It continues to live but in an inactive stage. When it gets warm and moisture, it begins to develop and multiply. It is suitable for sponge and dough method. It can be stored for long time, up to 4 to 6 months, due to less moisture content. The role of yeast during fermentation. It's a living organism. Yeast is a living organism. So, during fermentation, yeast takes all the sugar and gives carbon dioxide and a small quantity of alcohol. It helps the dough to rise. These functions are carried out by the many enzymes in the yeast. Here, carbon dioxide gives volume and softness, alcohol gives a slight sour acidic taste and kills the bacteria, and succinic acid, which is produced during fermentation, gives good flavor to the product. Protease, the enzyme, gives extensibility for the flours, that is formation of gluten, and makes it more soft. Enzymes act only in solution. Fermentation takes place in the presence of ideal conditions. For the yeast to ferment a product, the yeast needs food. And what is the food of the yeast? It is sugar and moisture, warmth, that is slightly warmer temperature, and acidity. Uses of yeast in bakery products. When yeast is mixed with flour into a dough, it releases carbon dioxide and it helps rise in the dough. Yeast increases the volume and improves the grain, the texture and flavor to the baked products. The yeast conditions the dough so that it attains sufficient mellowness to stretch under the pressure of carbon dioxide gas and form the structure of the product. Flavor, aroma and texture are the trademarks of what we call yeast fermentation, and they provide wonderful sensory and physical attributes that you expect from yeast raised products. One of the most common products, I'll give you an example for yeast fermentation, is the bread. Therefore, when you are walking from in front of a bakery and you cannot resist buying loaf of bread because of the wonderful flavors which come out of the bakery in which the bread is being baked. And also we use yeast in the preparation of pizza bases or buns or dinner rolls, etc. Since compressed and dried yeast consist of live vegetative cells, they therefore require careful storage. The compressed baker's yeast must at all times be stored under refrigeration as mentioned above. The dried baker's yeast need not be stored under refrigeration, but if this facility is available, such storage will considerably increase the usefulness and the life of the yeast. Vapor pressure is another leavening agent which we have spoken about after the natural leavening agents. Water, which is evenly distributed in the batter, forms vapor under the action of heat. This water vapor exerts an upward pressure, as a result of which leavening action is obtained in a product. Commonly used leavening acids are tartrates, monopotassium salt of tartaric acid, which reacts readily at room temperature and is relatively expensive. Phosphates, different sodium acid pyrophosphate powders are available. They vary in their reaction rates depending upon how they are made. Monocalcium phosphate, it reacts readily at room temperature and is widely used as the fast acting component in double acting baking powders. Phosphate powders react somewhat slower than tartrates at room temperature, but still lose a high percentage of their gas before baking. Next is sulphates, that is in the baking powders, they give very little gas at room temperature but release all the available gas only at the temperature of the oven. Ammonium bicarbonate or bicarbonate, when heated, releases ammonium carbon dioxide and water. Ammonium bicarbonate is used in cookies, crackers and similar products where the cellular structure is sufficiently porous to permit slow escape of gas. Completely, the taste and odor of the ammonia remains in the bakery product. If you use excess quantity, the biscuit cookies will spread during baking and it will spoil the appearance. So, here we are concluding the chapter on the leavening agents. So, as you have seen, we have 4 categories of leavening agents, starting from the chemical to the most natural ones, that is the yeast as well as the vapor pressure. So it all depends what is the purpose for which you need leavening. So if you are using for preparation of cakes and cookies etc., you need the chemical leavening agents, whereas if you are baking bread you need fermentation. For that purpose you need the natural yeast, and in certain products like our chapatis etc., the moisture will do the purpose of the or the function of the leavening agents. So I hope it is clear to you what are the leavening agents and the purposes and the products in which these are used.